know when you think you sent an email and then you're tidying up your desktop and you're like, oh no, you're just sitting there.
Yes.
So let me just send this.
Yeah, time is having strange meetings these days.
So I was at my doctor's office yesterday and I was looking at how, just for my general checkup, because you have to schedule it a month in advance. Like they won't, and then they check in with you throughout the month and making sure how you are. And I thought, there's a chance that I would be going to Utah, be going to New Orleans in July, and so I wanted to make sure that I, just with my ear stuff and my acid reflux and all that stuff. And apparently, I have. Because of the Peloton, my resting heart rate's at like 64 beats a minute, and I have like super low blood pressure. He's like, you have the heart of a hyper athlete right now, and I'm like, thank you.
Hmm.
But you look at like how his mask is so perfectly fit to his face, and like his nose under his glasses, like literally, it's like sucked on, like vacuumed onto his face, and I'm like thinking of this like fabric mask I'm wearing, and I'm like, oh God, this does nothing.
Mm-mm. No, it does do something though. I mean, and again, who knows, like by the time, folks are watching this, it'll probably be, I think we'll be a little bit further into July. And every day seems to be a year right now. But one thing that I don't think will change is, the more they're finding out about aerosolized particles and how things spread, there is evidence that any mask helps at all. And obviously there are different degrees of masks. So.
Yes. It's sort of like recycling, right? I mean, yes, does recycling solve the plastics problem? Absolutely not. Is it a function of a better version? Sure. Is it your effort to do something instead of nothing? Yes.
Well, it's funny. So it's funny that you bring that up because I was looking through one of our previous episodes and where we were talking about recycling. I think it was the episode where we talked about the banana leaves that were being used in Vietnam as alternative packaging for plastic. And we had started talking about this, and then Taryn, your dog got loose, so we abruptly ended. But
I was like, what?
yeah. But what I was going to bring up was this idea, that with recycling, there are sort of the smaller things that we can do, and then there are the larger systemic things that need to happen, which is true of many things these days. But one of the points I think that has been made about the smaller efforts that we take, the daily efforts to recycle, to change our plastic usage and all of that, is that it starts to train your mind to be in a mindset that this is important, that these are things we need to put time and energy into. So it basically starts to build up either a tolerance or a will for the larger systemic changes that, as Al Gore so aptly put so many years ago and is still true, they're an inconvenient truth, but they need to change. So if we can build up that will, and it's almost like, creating a habit,
Micro
then
behavioral changes.
yeah, that. Exactly. And I think that's, it's true of very many. And so I would venture to say that things like mask wearing contribute to the larger things that we need to do to help beat this pandemic.
Where the mask helps you the most is that it stops you from touching your face.
Hmm.
Hmm.
That is why I have to take Denny to the grocery store with me, and I can't send him alone because he will poison himself. That boy can't stop touching his face. It is just pulling teeth when we are in the store together. I'm like, you keep your hands that have been on a sanitized the cart,
Yeah.
you keep them there. Don't you touch your face. Don't you touch. Don't you reach into that cabinet. Don't you get into that freezer. I'm going to take care of it because it's 2 seconds, and I just see him scrubbing on his face. I was like, oh my God, you're gonna. It's really quite a hilarious tag team that we have at the grocery store now.
But and just the tactile nature of grocery shopping, of any kind of shopping, of like picking up something, of like squeezing a fruit and now it's like I'm not supposed to do that, and then I'll find myself, checking through, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm touching something. Like it's a very odd habit to break.
Hmm.
Well, it makes me think like that's why there are so many meet cute scenes in romantic comedies that are set in grocery stores with people fondling their produce. It's a very tactile, sensual experience.
I mean, so they're primed for their, in a
Hmm.
way,
Yeah.
to meet their mate.
Exactly.
You're just looking at flesh, right? Just
Oh my God, speaking of like mates and procreating. I was watching a quick news bite. There's an interesting, uh, I've been trying to watch Quibi before I cancel my membership, or even deciding if I'm going to cancel my membership or give it another month. And I'm not really a fan of any of the shows, but I really like the news shows. So they have like really innovative, interesting, micro news bursts, basically. The BBC has one, 60 Minutes has one, and I really like the BBC one, and they have usually like 4 stories. And one of them was, where was I think it was in Thailand, where there was this town that was being overrun by monkeys because the tourists had been feeding them so much junk food that they'd been procreating at this like hyper rate, and that they'd taken over this theater, and that when a monkey would die, they were using the projection room as like the cemetery for the monkeys, but that they were going to have to sterilize like 500 of them because the growth population, they were literally taking over this town. It was like a video of these hundreds of monkeys just like running down the street. You're like, oh my God.
Oh my
Wow.
God. All right. So I was thinking, since we are still in the coronavirus era and will be for quite some time, I was thinking about contact tracing. Um, and so I started looking into, obviously questions of privacy and health and all of that. But ultimately, contact tracing, one of the technologies it uses is GPS. Like so many of the other things in our modern life, from how we get to places, to like tagging pictures that we take on our phone, to obviously like larger military things that I don't like to read about because they scare me. So I went down a GPS rabbit hole, and the story I wanted to bring in is actually about one of the pioneers. I'm going to share my screen. Great. Okay, so she was a Black computer scientist, or a computer, much like the figures that we have heard about in the movie Hidden Figures. And she was one of the people who was responsible for doing the original set of calculations that ultimately would help to create the GPS system, the global positioning system. So you can see her right here. There she is being interviewed. This is in 2019, so a little over a year ago. She's still alive. She's retired. She's doing all kinds of fun things. One of the things that I thought was interesting about her story is that very little was known about her until she was a member of the sorority Alpha Kappa Alpha, and somebody was doing kind of like a history on some of their members, and it was a function that recognized senior members of the group. So she was putting together a bio about herself, and she noted that her career in the Navy, she worked at the base at Dahlgren, just had like one line in there about the fact that she was part of the team that helped develop the GPS system in the 50s and the 60s. And so, that of course sent me down the rabbit hole of like learning more about her and figuring out who she was. And it turns out she's originally from Virginia. Her parents, her dad was a tobacco farmer, and she grew up in Dinwiddie County, which is south of Richmond. And it says here, all Gladys May Brown knew was that she didn't want to work in the fields picking tobacco, corn, and cotton, or in a nearby factory beating tobacco leaves into pieces small enough for cigarettes and pipes like her parents did. And she found out that if she graduated first or second in her class, she could get a full ride to college. So she was like, well, I'm going to do that. And she did. And she went on to get several advanced degrees. She went to Virginia State College, which is now a university. And her teacher encouraged her to study math. And so, again, it just always shows that, like, having that mentor, having that person who sees that you are good at something and says, do this, it's so, so important. And then eventually she got a call from the base at Dahlgren and went to work there. And she started her career in 1956. She was the second Black woman hired at the base, and she was one of only 4 Black employees. Ultimately, she got married to a mathematician named Ira West, who was one of the other Black employees there. And so, lots going on. I really would like to see this story on the big screen. And it was a really exciting time to work there because they were just discovering computers. And a big part of what she was involved in was collecting information from satellites satellites and determining the exact location as they were transmitting from around the world, which ultimately helped to form the system for GPS. And GPS, what we call GPS, is part of the NavSat system, which is the system from the American military. It's a global system. Most of the world uses it. There are actually other global positioning systems, India, China, Russia, Europe. Some of them are worldwide systems, some of them are not. But usually when people talk about GPS, they're talking about the NavSat system. Also, another interesting thing, just as I was going down this little rabbit hole, is that I found out that, originally this was not available to everybody. It was, just for the military to use. But in 2000, President Clinton, flipped a switch, or ordered a flip switched, ordered a switch flipped. Yeah, it sounds like a dance move. In 2000, which basically turned something on in the satellites. So the receivers, so the satellites, they beam down a signal. They were received by receivers, and then by comparing the timestamp on when something was sent to when it was received, and comparing that data between several satellites, that's ultimately how you find your position. That's sort of like the one-liner. If you do, I will actually put in our notes. Took a deeper dive into like what GPS is. If you want to take a look at the math, I know that Gladys would probably appreciate that. But anyway, at that point, before he flipped that switch, the errors in positioning were about the size of a football field. And once that switch was made, it narrowed it down to a few meters. And suddenly it was made available to, for commercial use and apps and things like that. So that's why prior to that, we didn't have turn-by-turn navigation in our cars because it was too big, but now we do. So that is Gladys.
I knew what NavSat was, but I did not know that that's really what we're saying when we talk GPS.
Neither did I. If you saw me go down, it's because I was jotting that down to myself because I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's much like Xerox has, become ubiquitous for copies, but there are many ways to make copies. But yeah, NavSat is the U.S. military. And the other thing is, it's free. It's free to use. Like there's no charge for it. It's essentially a free utility, if you almost want to think of it that way.
I think my tax dollars pay for that utility. I think that my tax dollars have paid for ages and ages and ages of testing that then provides me with this now.
Well, the other reason I thought it was interesting, going back to the contact tracing is, we've certainly talked on here before about what are the things that we are willing to give up, what privacy things are we willing to give up in order for the benefits that we receive. Some people may not think of them as benefits at all. So, it really, it sort of always comes back to these very basic, interesting questions.
Yeah. There's a great piece in the New Yorker, I'll try and remember to put it in the notes, about how they believe that contact tracing is sort of the answer to Iceland's coronavirus issues. And it's because not only did they have excellent contact tracing, but they have this particular interesting quality about them is that almost everybody in Iceland is genetically identical. Their gene pool is so very small and they have a massive national database. So they could see micro evolutions in the virus and were able to track it a lot more keenly within their own population simply because they didn't have all this other genetic noise, essentially. And it was a great article.
Wow.
So highly recommend that if we're talking about other interesting transitions there. But
I want to go to Iceland. I just want to go out into the world right now. I want to be outside. And
speaking of outside, good transition, TK. Thank you.
What did I do there?
Oh, you were just generally brilliant.
Yeah, just generally brilliant. Well, I've been thinking a lot about wanting to go outside too, and I am not a camping person. That is not like a thing that I do, but apparently it's going to become a thing that I do because Denny bought us a tent. So I'm really excited, but it's got me really thinking a lot about spending time outside. And I happened to stumble upon this marine biologist on World Ocean Day. Just something came up on my feed. I'd never heard of her before. And her name is Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. And she's, like I said, she's a marine biologist, but she in general has a lot of work that she covers about Black people being out in nature, which apparently is like not a very common thing. And there's this big movement inside of the environmental movement to make it more accessible for women of color, especially. But the Black female community has really, like in my feed, has just blown up. I've been completely astonished that there's an entire world I absolutely knew nothing about.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that, I mean, I'll just interject by saying I think that's been, one of the things that has been a really wonderful benefit of this, this time that we're all going through, of everything that has, happened since George Floyd's death. I think that we're all making a very conscious effort to open up our worlds a little bit and change our feeds and change our sources of information. And, so yeah, continue. Sorry, didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt.
No, I'm so glad that that's been a byproduct of it because I've been really excited to be introduced to it, and especially Dr. Johnson because she's very interested in the ocean. And as much as I realize that our lives are made of water, I had not realized how eliminated or left out of the Green New Deal our oceans were. And I happened to read one of these blogs from Scientific American that Dr. Johnson wrote. So let me share this with you. I've never seen a proposed wind farm inside of the ocean, out deeper, out in the water. I've just never even, can't believe I've gone all these years, had no idea. I'd never seen anything like this. Anyway, it's a fantastic piece, not only about her experience with it, but her ways of looking at how we can use offshore renewable energy and other ways that the ocean needs to be considered as part of our climate change initiatives, both from an institutional level and on a personal level. But it's absolutely incredible how enormous of a resource we have in the ocean, and yet we just essentially don't do any of it. This is talking about using, ocean farming, because obviously wild fish has been an issue, and fish farming is challenging, and now there's all these fake fish, which, by the way, I have not eaten the like lab. I don't know that I would ever eat lab grown meat, but I definitely don't even want to eat like vegetarian fish because that just sounds really, really gross to me. Um, but anyway, this is really a great, a huge article. But they talk about the blue economy and also
Yeah.
it's sort of overall known as the Blue New Deal. And you can see on her Instagram, she's got a whole stories section here that you can go and read about the Blue New Deal. So anyway, I just was utterly blown away, and I feel very much like I need to drive to wherever there is an open beach and go walk around and be grateful for the water and think about the different ways that, especially during July, because this is Plastic Free July, that, the ocean pollution is really an enormous problem with plastics. So it's got me having a new appreciation for the ocean and a new appreciation for a community of people who are really, truly embodying intersectional environmentalism.
I'd never heard of a Blue New Deal before, but that's fantastic. I'm going to research that. She
Right?
looks like such a badass.
Oh, she's
Like her,
super cool.
I'm like, whoa, she's badass. Yeah.
If you go to Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Instagram, she handed the mic over to Dr. Johnson on
Oh,
that week, and
that's
there was
why her name sounds somewhat. Okay, now I'm putting all the pieces. Okay.
yes, she is fantastic. Anyway, she's I couldn't find that, otherwise I would have brought it up on here. But it was a really great talk, and they talk about the future of climate change and the activism in young people and what can we do. And anyway, it was just a really neat exchange, and she's so fun and so funny and just super elegant and beautiful. I just was like, I want to be you when I grow up. I love it.
We should do when some of the restrictions are lifted. We should do a beach clean, the three of us, when we're all in the same city.
That's a
One of
great
these,
idea.
we did one of those a long time ago, but I know because of so many disposable masks and so many people using just disposable everything these days to cut back on transmission. But it's cluttering up the beaches. I have photographer friends who just share these, beach garbage pictures that they see, and it's just
Sort of the problem too about people you not being able to bring your coffee mug into Starbucks or
right.
whatever, that all those sorts
Your
of things.
bags. You can't bring any of your own bags. And
Yeah, we've been putting them in the grocery cart and then pushing it out to the car and then loading up our bags in the back of the car. Yeah, all those sorts of things, trying to do that and to try and be aware of it during Plastic Free July is always a good challenge for all of us.
if anyone can do it, it's you, Gia. I wish you could can you please do a blog post about that? How during the pandemic I have been succeeding at my plastic-free life.
I know there'll just be like photo after photo of me yanking my hair out, like, why can't I find something that doesn't come in plastic? Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Darren, what caught your eye?
We'll go from the ocean to the stars.
Ooh.
Actually, to an asteroid. I was thinking along, we are bringing up African American women in science and technology today, and it's just it wasn't specifically mandated, but it was something as part of a larger conversation that we're having. And I was going back and thinking about how the Science and Entertainment Exchange, which of course you both know, but our viewers might not know it. It's a nonprofit organization based in DC, but also has a Los Angeles satellite office that pairs screenwriters with scientists to add legitimacy to any sort of sci-fi project that has science elements to it. And we all go to their events. And one of the events that I went to at the end of last year was a science speed dating event where they brought together 7 different African American scientists. And they had an actor slash activist who has an Afrofuturism podcast be the host of it. And it was just a really amazing night. And one of the scientists was named Tracy Drain. And she was just such a fabulous woman to listen to. And they basically present in this sort of speed dating way. So we weren't dating the scientists, just so you know. We were learning from them in an accelerated way. So they would we're paired, we sit in a classroom, and basically these scientists rotate through, and they have like 10 minutes each to give us a brief overview of the work that they're currently doing. And so anyway, so you two know that, so I'm telling the audience. So Tracy, she is an engineer, and she is working on a project for NASA going out to the asteroid in what I would assume would be the Kuiper Belt. The Kuiper Belt is between Mars and Jupiter, yes?
I believe so.
I believe so. I should have researched this, sorry. But the thing, and this asteroid is called Psyche. So this is actually an article on the Psyche mission first, which they just picked earlier this year to use the SpaceX Falcon Heavy to launch the mission. But so this is just, we'll link to this, and it gives you a little bit of information about what this mission is doing, which is that it's going to an asteroid that is unique. It is not made of rock. It is not made of ice. It is made of metal. So it's made of iron and other metals. I should know more.
Here, wait, it's right there. The asteroid is considered unique as it appears to be largely made of the exposed nickel-iron core of an early planet, one of the building blocks of our solar
But that's
system.
what I was getting to, is that it basically mimics what the core of our planet looks like. So because we obviously have multiple layers to get down to the core, we can't study the core directly, and because of the heat involved. But we can actually look at the early stage of what Earth would be like by visiting this asteroid. So this gives us sort of a time travel device back to the early days of our planet. And also, you have an asteroid that has potentially other minerals on it that could be very valuable. So now this is Tracy, and this was the bio that is on the Science and Entertainment Exchange event. So we will link to this. And one of the things I really loved, of course, about her is that one of the reasons she got into...
Oh, yeah.
And she actually did a lot of promotions for Hidden Figures, which is a movie that we all love. But one of the reasons she got interested in space was because her mom would take her to movies, and she loved Star Trek, Star Wars, and Battlestar Galactica. So, there's one of your sci-fi springboards into a career of STEM, which is great. And she went to school, University of Kentucky. There's another, and she worked on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter mission and the Kepler mission, which of course is one of my favorites, being the first mission to be able to visually identify exoplanets. So she has been working in this realm for a while, and now she is the Deputy Project System Engineer for this Psyche mission. And so I'm super, and she's just, one of those amazing science communicators, which makes me think of that beautiful statement that the New Zealand Prime Minister recently made, which we shared on our Twitter feed, where she thanked scientists and science communicators to help combat the pandemic or the coronavirus and accelerate the sort of shortening of the pandemic restrictions. And it's refreshing to hear a person in government leadership acknowledge the importance of these important people.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have, so there's the spotlight on her, and then she has a great Wikipedia page too.
Dang, girl.
I know. Like, seriously. She has TEDx talks too.
She's just an awesome person if you happen to catch her too.
Yeah, no, now that as soon as I saw her face, I'm much better visually than I am with names. And as soon as you brought up her face, I remembered now meeting her. It wasn't at that same speed dating event, but she spoke. I don't remember if she spoke, but I remember speaking to her after the presentations at a different science and entertainment exchange event. So
I love any asteroid mission too. Like, I'm obsessed with Osiris-Rex going out to the Bennu asteroid, which that's going to be, that's going to be one of the first. I mean, I guess there was a Japanese mission that recently landed on an asteroid, but this will be the first time that a NASA mission goes out to an asteroid and samples it and then comes back with that sample.
Well, that's actually the perfect transition into what are we all watching right now or reading right now or recommending right now, because my answer to that is I am actually catching up on The Expanse, which,
cool.
which I had watched the first season of, or watched half of the first season, but then fell behind. So now I'm catching up because it's a good time to catch up on things. Which, for those who are not familiar, it's a sci-fi series that is. Well, it may be about other things because there's more seasons than I've watched, but so far is about a world where there's the Earth, there's a society on Earth, Mars, and there's a whole bunch of asteroid miners, and that's the politics and between all of those groups is a big part of the world that they've created. So, being that Tracy was inspired by so much sci-fi, I would love to hear her opinion on what she thinks of that series. Gia, Taryn, what are you both watching right now?
I'm not watching. I'm always watching something, but right now I'm super into my novel, which I never allow myself to read novels because I will forego everything, including food and sleep, in order to read. So I have to sort of allocate my time into that, which explains how I went through childhood with no friends and no problem with it.
You had friends. They were just in your mind.
Exactly. They were all characters in my books. That's right. But this one is called Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessel. It was recommended to me by my dearest friends, Sean Carroll and Jennifer Willett, who are brainiacs of the nth degree, and they always have the best recommendations for all things culture and science. And Sean was like, this is a book you have to read. And I have had it sitting on my bookshelf for ages because it's a bit of a tome, which is why I could never allow myself to dive. But now I'm in and I am loving it. It's awesome. So enjoy your summer reading, everybody. Yay.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I am currently reading, just started Maria Popova's Figuring, which, I mean, brain picker. I love, and it's just, she's so stunning, and the way her mind works, threading stories, and these are stories of Mariah Mitchell and Kepler, and these are all ancient scientists, new scientists, feminists, queer scientists. It's just these beautiful, and artists, of course. She goes into Emerson's work, and it just is. It gives you this. It's kind of hard to describe this delicate web of insight into sort of how we've at the height of what we could be as a species, I guess is what I would say. But also on the TV front, we're up to season 3 of Dear White People, which is, my husband and I did a conscientious dive into Black entertainment. We went full in, and we're like, okay, we have to educate ourselves and educate ourselves on our own biases. And so we've been continuously watching this because we're just addicted to the show because it's just highly entertaining. And it's so prescient for what's going on right now, and the discussions that they have in the show, which the first episodes were, released a couple of years ago, are literally the conversations that white people are having amongst themselves and within the, and the larger communities in general too, of just like, how were we so clueless to some of these issues? So I highly recommend it. And it was based on a movie.
The movie's great too. Like I would
Yeah,
say
I
if you
never saw the
don't,
movie.
I saw the movie, and so I would say if you don't have the time in your schedule right now to take on a full series, give yourself 2 hours and watch the movie because it's wonderful. It stars Tessa Thompson, one of the
I love
earlier
her.
movies of her career pre Marvel, and it's great.
And she makes a cameo in this at the end of the first season in a role that is diametrically opposed to what the role she played in the
Oh,
movie
Oh,
is, which
that's
is,
pretty cool.
I
yeah.
love when that
Well,
happens.
speaking of movies and TV shows that were the same thing that also have to do with what's happening right now in the bigger conversation, Watchmen is fantastic. Again, I'm not into superheroes. I'm not even really that into sci-fi. Somehow that show managed to be both and then so much more, and also like a love story. And I cried because I was like, it's just about life in general, and we don't know what the future is. It's beautiful. So I highly recommend, and also great history lessons in there too. Really,
I had
really
no
good.
idea about the Tulsa Massacre until I watched it. And I'm so embarrassed to say it, but I didn't.
Well, these are all of the gaps in our knowledge that we are actively working to fill in, and I'm sure we'll continue to find out where there are other gaping holes. And thanks to everyone who helps us, exposes us to new ideas, and asks us to really question ourselves. And I really appreciate that. That's what we want to be as curious, interested people in the world.
Exactly. So if you have other thoughts and suggestions on what we all should be reading and listening and watching right now, please put them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching Siren Show, and we will see you next time.
Bye. Ba, ba, do,